Good morning. Thanks, Abbas, for the introduction and also for the invitation to present today. And I'd just like to get a thumbs up from someone if you can see my slides.
Yep, everything looks great, Nelia.
Okay, great. So I gotta get my timer going here. So this morning, I'm planning to give you an overview of critical mineral research that we carry on at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, which is New Mexico's Geological Survey. And before getting started, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors who provided a lot of the information for this talk, Dr. Virginia McLemore and Dr. Alex Giese. And I saw from the chat, I think both of them are on. So if we get hard questions at the end, I will defer to them. Before I get started, I'd like to give you a quick snapshot of our state survey. So we're a non-regulatory agency that conducts scientific investigation leading to responsible economic development of the state's mineral, water, and energy resources. We are a research subdivision of New Mexico Tech. We were founded in 1927 through state legislation. We currently have 66 full and part-time staff with a range of expertise. And we also have a number of active emeritus and adjunct staff members. And we mentor and employ a total of around 40 graduate and undergraduate students in any given year. So during the workshop so far, we have heard a lot about critical minerals, and so I'm not really going to dwell on that, but I would like to focus specifically on New Mexico. So New Mexico has a number of the minerals on the list of 35 critical minerals that was published in 2018. Potash is currently being produced in the southeast part of the state near Carlsbad. There is rhenium, indium, and germanium in some of the porphyry copper deposits in Grant County, New Mexico. We have large uranium deposits in the Grants District. None are currently being mined. There has been exploration for critical minerals, including rare earths, tellurium, lithium, beryllium, and cobalt. And other critical minerals have been produced in New Mexico. And those are summarized on this periodic table, which shows in red elements that are currently being produced, critical minerals or critical elements that are currently being produced in New Mexico, including potassium in the Potash District and also helium. In blue are shown elements that were once produced in New Mexico. And you can see there's a wide range of elements there. In green are elements with known occurrences in New Mexico. And then in yellow are the fairly small number of critical elements that have not been recognized in New Mexico. So our survey has a long history of involvement in mineral resource research. For many years, there was a U.S. Bureau of Mines office housed at New Mexico Tech. That moved to Denver in the 50s. But the U.S. Bureau of Mine records were the start of our quite extensive and continuously updated mining archive, a mining archive database and also physical materials, which are part of our Geologic Information Center. And those are things that we make widely available to the public. Many of our early publications, as well as a lot of recent ones, focus on resources that are now considered to be critical minerals. And in the slide, you can see on the right, an image of the cover of one of our first bulletins. So it was New Mexico Bureau of Geology, Bulletin 4, produced in 1928, and that focused on fluorspar in New Mexico. And many, when I was looking back at the older publications, many of the older publications are focused on various critical minerals. There's also historically been a lot of metallurgical work that's gone on in the Bureau, not so much anymore, but there was in the past. And there were studies carried out on barite, fluorite, and potash. We also had a lot of involvement in the NURI project, which other people have talked about earlier in the conference. We have ongoing work on helium, mostly done by an emeritus geologist, Ron Broadhead, who was in our petroleum group. And then we have ongoing work initiated in the 1980s on rare earth element mineralization of Cambrian, Ordovician, and tertiary alkaline and carbonatitic magmatism in New Mexico. And our principal senior economic geologist, Dr. Virginia McLemore, did her master's thesis on one of these projects and has continued working on that ever since. So, as we've heard in talks yesterday and earlier today, having good analytical data is really important in understanding critical mineral deposits. And the Bureau of Geology is a little bit unusual in state geological surveys in that we house a lot of state-of-the-art laboratory facilities, which serve the analytical needs not only of our scientists, but of a broad group of researchers throughout New Mexico and really beyond New Mexico. So I'm going to highlight a couple of those labs because they are really an integral part of our critical mineral research program. The first one that I'm going to highlight is the New Mexico Geochronology Research Laboratory, which is a cutting-edge argon laboratory for dating rocks. And this is an image of the lab today. This lab was founded in the early 90s with a combination of funding, and now houses 2 cutting-edge mass spectrometers for dating rocks. So there's been a tremendous amount of dating of rocks in New Mexico and elsewhere that's gone on in this lab. And a lot of that has supported economic geology research at the Bureau. We also have a really nice suite of microbeam capabilities. And we saw some nice examples of microbeam images in Tristan's talk. So we have an electron microprobe. It's a Kamika SX100. It's shown in this image here. And this is an instrument that I had funded from the National Science Foundation in the mid-90s. And I ran that instrument for many years. It's a terrific instrument. It's been a real workhorse, and we've produced huge amounts of images, chemical maps, geochemical information using this instrument. Now, if you saw the machine today, it looks a little bit different than the machine in this. Oh, it's the same machine, but it looks a little bit different than in this image because about 6 years ago, we were able to obtain funding to get an additional spectrometer for this instrument. And we tailored that spectrometer to analyzing rare earth elements. Rare earth elements are tricky to analyze on the probe, but the spectrometer that we got really facilitates that. So we've been doing quite a bit of rare earth element focused analyses on this instrument. We also have a few SEMs on campus and a really nice X-ray diffraction instrument in the Bureau that is used for quite a bit of economic geology and other research. We also have a fair amount of water-focused equipment. I'm not going to dwell on that, but just to say that this lab, the analytical chemistry lab, also supports a lot of the economic geology-focused research in the Bureau. We have a couple of ICP-MSs. We have an ICP optical emission spectrometer that was just funded by NSF, and also a number of other pieces of instrumentation. And we are developing also, you'll hear about this later in the talk, experimental capabilities in the Bureau with the hire of Alex Giese, who's a co-author in this talk. So you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. For the next part of the talk, I'm going to focus largely on rare earth element related research in New Mexico. And first, I'd like to give you a short summary of a really interesting research project that I was involved in with Ginger prior to becoming the director of the Bureau. And then I'm going to present to you some really quick thumbnails of some ongoing research projects, which is actually going to be made a lot easier by Kyle's nice introduction to a couple of these projects. The map that I'm showing you here is a nice overview of rare earth element occurrences in New Mexico classified by deposit type. So in the gold color, and you can see a number of those on the map, are Proterozoic alkaline rocks and pegmatites that have associated rare earth element occurrences. In red are Cambrian alkaline rocks that also have rare earth element occurrences. You can see a number of those. The blues and greens are placer deposits, and then the purple are tertiary alkaline igneous rocks with associated rare earths. And during the next parts of the talk, I'm going to focus a little bit on the Caballo Mountains and the Burro Mountains here. Then I'm going to move up to the Guyanus Mountains and talk a little bit about that, and then finally to the Cornus Mountains, which have already been introduced by Tristan. Okay, so next, in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a quick overview of a research project that a Bureau of Geology team carried out a number of years ago with USGS Mineral Program funding. The names of the investigators are shown in the upper right of the slide, and I would just like to point out that the first name and the last name on this list were both master's students, which is part of our mentoring the next generation of economic geology researchers. This was a really fascinating project that could easily merit an hour-long talk, but I'm just going to give you the highlights of it. So there's going to be a lot left out. But We do have some publications on that, and if people are interested in getting more information, I'm happy to share more slides or publications with you. And this work was focused on the Caballo and Burrow Mountain rare earth bearing epicyanides. So first, let's consider the Caballo Mountains, and this is a Google Earth image looking from the southeast at the Caballo Mountain range. And in the lower part of the image, the kind of drab color here is Precambrian granite, and then you can see the contact between the overlying Bliss sandstone and other Paleozoic sediments. But what I would like to call your attention to on this image is this red patch in the middle view, which is an epicyanide. Epicyanides are an unusual rock type that are found in Precambrian granites in the Caballo and Burrow Mountains of New Mexico and other places. They are often a brick red color. And in the last image, you could see that red patch. But in this image, which shows a closer up view of outcrop scale of those same rocks, you can see this really dark brick red color. These epicyanide rocks are very potassium rich, and some of them contain up to 16 weight percent K2O. And for those of you who remember your feldspar mineralogy, 16% K2O is basically end member feldspar, potassium feldspar. So these epicyanides are very K-feldspar rich and very quartz poor. And the reason that we were studying them is some of them have anomalous concentrations of uranium, thorium, and rare earth elements, which of course make them relevant to today's economy. First, we'll consider the epicyanides in the field. And one of the first questions we really were trying to focus on is, are these epicyanides igneous or are they metasomatic? And that is really a topic that has to be addressed in the field. And I'm going to call your attention to the image on the left, which is a contact between granite and epicyanide in the Caballo Mountains. And this is the epicyanide, the very red rock, and the granite is the drabber color. And in this instance, you can really put your finger on the contact between the granite and the epicyanide. And we weren't really able to discern any textural continuity across that contact. So based on what we saw, at this place in the Caballos, could have kind of gone either way about whether this was an intrusive rock or a metasomatic rock. But then at another location in the Burrow Mountains, we looked at a very distinctive granite called the Jack Creek Rapakivi granite. And you can see in the image on the upper right that Rapakivi granite with these huge feldspars. What we noticed at this location, where there were also epicyanides present, is that there was a gradational contact between the unaltered Jack Creek Rapakivi granite and the very strongly reddened and chemically altered epicyanide. So and also the large feldspar crystals, which you can just barely see here, have been preserved, but they're really extensively reddened. And the mafic minerals in the rock, in the granite, are still present, but they're chloratized. And one thing we recognized also here is that the reddening of this rock is caused by oxidation of magnetite to hematite. So the observations at the Jack Creek location really strongly suggest a metasomatic origin for these epicyanides. We then started to look at the chemistry. And again, there was a lot of work done on this, and I'm just going to give you kind of the highlights. And the diagram I'm showing you here is a chondrite normalized plot showing 3 representative rocks. In blue is the granite, the unaltered granite. In red is one epicyanide from the Caballo Mountains, and in black is a second epicyanide from the Caballo Mountains. And the thing that is interesting about these is these 2 epicyanides show very different rare earth element patterns, although they are geographically close to each other. They're not in completely different areas. They are both from the same geographic area in the Caballo Mountains. So this is an interesting observation. And what we did next was to really delve into the mineralogy. So to better understand the rare earth elements variation that we see in the epicyanides, we started to examine the mineralogy. And I'm going to show you a representative set of images here. So on the left is a backscattered electron image. It's about 100 microns in diameter. And you can see 4 phases on here easily. The darkest phase is iron oxide. The gray phase up here, I'm hoping you can see my pointer, is titanium oxide. But then what I'd like to call your attention to are these 2 brighter phases shown here and here. If you look at the chemical map, the map next to the backscatter image, we have false colored, we've done chemical mapping, integrated those, and false colored that to identify different phases. And what we see that I'd like to point out are synchosite, which is a light rare earth element enriched phase in green, and thorite, which is a thorium uranium silicate, which concentrates heavy rare earth elements in blue. Now, these 2 phases, the light rare earth enriched phase and the heavy rare earth enriched phase, are similar in size, and their contacts appear to be very sharp. There's no obvious cross-cutting relationships. And the simplest explanation, although I would admit not the only explanation, is that these 2 phases were co-precipitated from one fluid. So our interpretation is that this rare earth element mineralization may have been achieved in a single alteration event that was co-precipitating one phase that had concentration of heavy rare earths and one phase that had concentration of light rare earths. So to look at that further, we did some detailed microbeam, electron microprobe work on those 2 phases, on the thorite and the synchosite. And again, this is challenging work, but there are good methods for doing this. And again, chondrite normalized diagram showing selected rare earth elements in the thorite and synchosite. And you can see that the 2 have very distinctive patterns. The synchosite is light rare earth element enriched, and the thorite is heavy rare earth element enriched. And when you compare the geochemical patterns of the 2 epicyanides, the heavy rare earth enriched and light rare earth enriched, compare those to the geochemical patterns of the synchosite and thorite, this suggests to us that the rare earth element mineralogy in this whole rocks is really what is controlling whether they are heavy rare earth element enriched or light rare earth element enriched. So our suggestion is that this is all part of one fluid event. Some of the alteration is more enriched in heavy rare earth element minerals and some more in light, and that's really controlling the composition of the epicyanides. Now, the literature suggests that there's multiple factors that control rare earth element mobility and stability in fluids, including evolving fluid chemistry, wall rock interaction depth, temperature, pH. None of these factors have been constrained in the Caballo or Burro Mountains and would be a great target for future work. So in conclusion, these epicyanides in the Caballo Mountains and Burro Mountains and other places in New Mexico, we consider to be metasomatic in origin. The mineralogy suggests alteration by one type of fluid, and the fluid may be related to unexposed Cambrian Ordovician alkaline and carbonatite intrusions. Okay, so in my last few minutes, I am going to highlight a set of ongoing research projects that are relevant to rare earth elements that are being carried out at the Bureau. And the first one I'm going to mention is an Earth MRI, and Tristan gave us a great introduction to Earth MRI, so I won't really go into that. But the project I'm going to focus on here is in the Guaymas Mountains, which is a big igneous complex in the central part of New Mexico. And you can see the authors of the investigators involved in the project listed here. We have a lot of student involvement. So there has been rare earth element mining in the past in the Guaymas Mountains at a place called Red Cloud Mine. And the mineralization is bastnasite. And you can see in this image here a nice 8mm bastnasite crystal surrounded by purple fluorite breccia. So this project is a mapping project, also a geochemical project. You can see our part of our field team here mapping in the Guyanese Mountains. There was extensive mapping work, a lot of geochemistry and geochronology. The geochronology suggests that this big igneous complex was actually active for a long period of time, with early magmatic activity close to 40 million years old, and then some of the youngest alteration and young intrusions as young as 24 million. 5 types of mineral deposits were identified in the Guyanese, and I won't go into detail on those, you can read them, but I will point out that there are these intrusive brecciapipes, which are shown in maroon on the geologic map that's shown in the lower part of your image. And this geologic map was one of the products of this project in the Guyanese Mountains, and Ginger has just finished up the report on this, so it's a really nice, interesting piece of work. And for more details on this, you'd be able to contact her and talk to her about this. I will highlight one point that was elucidated during this project, is that there are a number of large faults in the area shown in the dotted lines here. But the mineralization, with the exception of 2 faults, the Pride Fault and the Buckhorn Fault here, the mineralization is not coincident with some of the big faults in the area. Okay, the next project I'll highlight is the Cornus Mountain project. And Tristan gave us a really nice introduction to this project. And I'll just mention again that this is a project that we're doing collaboratively with the Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, and working in the Trans-Pecos igneous belt that runs between New Mexico and Texas, that was very nicely introduced by Tristan. And you can also see in the image on in the lower part of the slide, this is Wind Mountain, which was also shown in one of Tristan's images. And there was mining at the base of Wind Mountain in the past. So we're about a year into this project, still very focused on the mapping work. And one of the things that has been identified at this point based on the mapping on Wind Mountain is there was differential cooling of the magma, which resulted in textural variation across Wind Mountain. In the upper right here, you can see a compilation of a lot of rare earth element data for this area, showing generally light rare earth element enriched, up to close to 4,000 parts per million of total rare earth elements. There's also neodymium and beryllium and fluorine. Unlike the Guyanese, eudialyte is the primary rare earth element bearing phase in the Cornus Mountains. And as Tristan mentioned in his talk, additional mineralogy, mapping, geochemistry, dating are underway. And it's really wonderful to have that fantastic geophysical imaging that was done by the USGS. There is a new date, I think it's a new date, on the Cornus of 36.3 million, which actually agrees fairly well with some of the older dating, also in the 36 million year range. And there's ongoing additional geochronology going on. I will just give you in the next slide just a quick peek at a compilation of some of the geochemistry on Wind Mountain, which Ginger provided me and I find very interesting. So each of these colored points shows a location where there has been whole rock geochemical analysis. And the color of the dot corresponds to the concentration, the total rare earth element concentration in the given sample. And one of the things that I think is really striking about this is that there's a tremendous variation across this relatively small igneous body in the amount of rare earth elements in a given hand sample. So the original mine is shown here in black. There is some high concentration rare earth element samples right near that mine, but also high concentrations in other parts of the complex, intermixed with a lot of lower concentrations of total rare earths in the bulk rock. So that's the wind whirl version of Cornus. And then also Tristan gave us a nice introduction to their CORES project in Texas. We have a parallel project going on in New Mexico that is in the San Juan River Raton Basin in the northwest corner of New Mexico. Ginger McLemore is very involved in this project, as are other Bureau researchers. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. This project is just getting started, but Tristan gave us such a nice summary of the project in Texas. And I would say that what we're doing in New Mexico is very parallel to that. Okay, now I'm going to talk briefly about some new capabilities that we are bringing to the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources with a Bureau employee, Dr. Alexander Giese, who has a split position between the Bureau of Geology and the academic department at New Mexico Tech. And he has formed an ore deposit and critical minerals research group in the Bureau at New Mexico Tech. So this research group, in addition to the very field-focused research that I talked about in the last few slides, we're also now developing a really strong experimental laboratory capability that's relevant to thermodynamics of rare earth elements, other critical minerals, all built on field observations. And again, Alex Giese is the lead scientist in this effort and is collaborating with other scientists at the Bureau and also in the New Mexico Tech Academic Division. Alex is in the process of developing a cutting-edge critical minerals experimental laboratory that I'll talk about a little bit in the next couple slides, is also continuing the development of the MINES Thermodynamic Database that I will talk about, in addition to continuing field observations of critical mineral deposits. Right now, this research group has funding at about the $3 million level coming from DOE and NSF. Their team currently consists of three PhD students, 2 master's students, 1 undergrad, 2 postdocs. They recently got some good news that there is going to be some additional DOE funding related to US Geoscience Critical Minerals Experimental Thermodynamic Research Hub, which is a collaboration between New Mexico Tech, Los Alamos, and Indiana University at Bloomington. And there will be 3 additional PhD students and 3 postdocs. So this group is developing really great critical mass. In the experimental lab, which is shown in the picture in the upper right, there is ongoing work on hydrothermal fluid mineral experiments, and also with the acquisition of a hydrothermal solution calorimeter, which is shown here. Nice research going on thermodynamic properties of critical minerals and their solid solutions. And with this calorimeter, you can measure enthalpy of mixing, heat capacity, mineral stability. They also have acquired a UV visible spectrophotometer that allows you to examine complexation of rare earth elements in aqueous species and allows them the ability to do flow-through experiments. So you can be changing the conditions and looking at the complexation. And also some recent good news from National Science Foundation is that we are getting a Raman spectrometer funded here. That hasn't arrived yet, but should be arriving soon. The research group also maintains a thermodynamic database, which provides comprehensive thermodynamic data on rare earths, as well as base and other precious metals. And Alex and others hold annual conferences to help people access and use this database. This is a great service for the whole geochemical community. And again, Alex is on this call if anyone has any questions for him about that. So in conclusion, the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources has a long history of in the field of critical minerals. Our labs are a really essential component, and they're to the critical mineral research going on in our state. And we do also have opportunities for laboratory support and collaboration with other state surveys. We have a number of ongoing research projects in the broad field of critical minerals with strong field and lab components, and we plan to continue and grow this research area. And finally, and I think this is something that really is important and is something that our scientists put a huge amount of effort into, is that we are actively training the next generation of critical mineral scientists, ranging from undergrads at New Mexico Tech all the way up through postdoctoral research associates. And I think that's a real service that state surveys can provide, not only to their states, but to the country as a whole. So that's what I have. Thank you.